Hello and welcome back to A Christmas Carol, Annotate with me, with Miss S. If you want to pause the video here and go and grab your copy of A Christmas Carol and a highlighter and a pen so you can make the annotations along with me, as well as the revision booklet that you may have printed off by now. I've said in my previous videos that this revision booklet, a link to it, will be in the description box below, in our Facebook page, English Illuminated. So feel free to use this resource. We will be collecting more quotations at the end of this video once I've gone through the next part of stave 1. So last time we did the first part of stave 1, we are now on the second section of stave 1, and let's make a start. So, once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighbouring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. So here Dickens has created an ominous tone with the persistent darkness and the thick fog turning the houses into phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. So there's the theme of the supernatural again, but not in a scary manner, in a more entertaining manner, like we've discussed in the previous videos. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk. So he wants to keep an eye on the person who works for him, who in a dismal little cell beyond a sort of tank was copying letters. So here Cratchit, who works for Scrooge, who's Scrooge's clerk, works in a dismal little cell. So that word, the adjective dismal, is really important because it suggests that it's a depressing room. And the word cell and tank are also important because it suggests that Cratchit is trapped in his position working for Scrooge due to the poverty he faces that we will see later on. So here, by referring to a cell, Dickens is making it clear to readers that the rich were able to exploit the poor, so take advantage of the poor, as their desperate working conditions were inescapable, so they had no choice but to work for them because of how desperately poor they were. A sort of tank, so this quotation here, highlights the emptiness of the room, but also Scrooge's distrust of Bob, so needing to keep an eye on him all the time. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. So Cratchit has one piece of coal and a candle to warm himself, which we'll find out about in a moment as well. So as soon as Scrooge sees the fire needs restocking, he calls an end to the day to save money. So here we've got more hints at the context of the Victorian period, so 803. It hints at the lack of workers' rights and the harsh working conditions that the poor had no choice but to endure. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle. So here he's got, like I mentioned earlier, he's got one coal that's about to burn out and a candle to keep him warm in this frosty, biting cold weather. In which efforts, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, uncle?" said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I am sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas! What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." So here Scrooge is implying that wealth equals happiness, but interestingly, Fred responds with, "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." So this is a humorous response in jest that Fred makes in jest, but it's very truthful because we see that actually, ironically, even though Scrooge implies here that wealth can actually make you happy, how can we? It's questionable how miserable and depressed he himself is, despite his being rich. Scrooge, having no better answer, ready on the spur of the moment, said "Bah!" again, and followed it with "Humbug!" "Don't be cross, uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be," returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer? A time for balancing your books and having every item in 'em through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." So here, Scrooge gives a list of reasons why somebody shouldn't be happy in Christmas, so he should be miserable in Christmas, and all of these things in his life that make him miserable. So we see him as incredibly pessimistic, so in complete contrast to Fred. "If I could work my will," said I've read this bit. "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone then," said Scrooge. Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say." So, here Fred speaks about profit. So anything that makes Scrooge at all happy is anything that's profitable, anything that makes him money. But here Fred is talking about how there's so much joy in the world apart from making money, and most of his happiness has come from other things apart from making money, returned the nephew. "Christmas among the rest, but I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time." So Fred here is the direct opposite to Scrooge, and sees the joy in giving and selflessness. "The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave." So he's hinting at the poor, the really destitute, the people. So anybody who is below you, to open your hearts to them and to see them as equals to you, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good. And I say, God bless it. So here, again, the direct opposite of Scrooge is extremely optimistic, and he keeps hinting at and implying and suggesting that money does not buy happiness. There's far more things in the world that make you happy, which is a real tough lesson for Scrooge, but he does eventually learn it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Scrooge. So he's speaking to Cratchit here. "And you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir." So he's saying to Cratchit not to stop cheering Fred on, otherwise he'll lose his job. And then he moves on to Fred and describes him as a powerful speaker. Turning to his nephew, "I wonder you don't go into Parliament." "Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first. So Scrooge is saying that he'll see him once he's died. So he'll see him in Christmas once he has died. "But why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why? Why did you get married?" said Scrooge. "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love?" growled Scrooge, as if that were the only one thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." "Nay, uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. So Fred here is a really compassionate, caring, empathetic character who we are supposed to love and see as a direct contrast to his uncle Scrooge. "I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. So a Merry Christmas, uncle." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge. So we've got the hint here at Cratchit's warm character in comparison to Scrooge's cold character, for he returned them cordially. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam." This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead 7 years," Scrooge replied. "He died 7 years ago this very night." "We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts." So here there's the repetition of noun, common, suggesting how trivial and everyday the items that the poor want are. So it highlights obviously the level of destitution that the poor face, the fact that they need just the common necessary items. And then this is Scrooge's response. "Are there no prisons?" asked Scrooge. So the poor were often sent to prisons. Okay, so this is a key contextual bit. Okay, so it links to 803 context. They were often sent to prisons because they couldn't pay off their debts or because they couldn't fend for themselves. So this is almost criminalizing the poor, making them seem like criminals who deserve to go to prison. Plenty of prison, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the union workhouses, demanded Scrooge, are they still in operation? So workhouses were places where the poor were often sent to work for the bare minimum, so food and shelter. Families were often separated. There was huge overcrowding, extremely unhygienic. The conditions were dire, and people really feared going there because of how bad the situations in workhouses were. They are still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour then, said Scrooge. So I'm just going to stop here and I'm going to highlight this. It's really important that you do look into, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's really important that you go into looking at the poor law and how it was introduced in the Victorian period. And what effect it was supposed to have, but what effect it actually had. Okay, so once you've finished watching this video, you might want to go ahead and do a bit of research into the poor law and its significance in the novel and in Victorian England as a whole. Both very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, returned the gentleman, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others, when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for? So here, people who are well off are able to enjoy themselves. That's what the charity worker is saying. People who are well off are able to enjoy themselves more than usual in Christmas. So this is in stark contrast to those with nothing. So we see here Fred's assertion that people are more open with their hearts at Christmas, echoing in what the charity collectors are saying here, as well about how people are more open to giving at Christmas time. What shall I put you down for? Nothing, Scrooge replied. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. So this word idle means lazy. So the idle poor would have been a popular interpretation of the poor. So they were often seen, the poor in Victorian England were often seen as lazy, and that's why they were poor. I mean, it's very interesting this, because it's easier to blame someone for being a product of a broken or unequal society than to try and help them, isn't it? So we see this allusion there of how unfair Dickens felt it to be called idle when you don't have any other option. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. So this use of dysphemistic language. So dysphemistic language is harsh and abrupt language, highlights the terrible conditions in the workhouses. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. So here we see again Scrooge's use of dysphemistic language, harsh and abrupt language. When he's speaking about the poor, he's saying that they may as well just die out if they can't fend for themselves. And this is a direct reference to the Malthus theory. So again, AO3 reference here, contextual reference here. Thomas Malthus was an economist who believed that there were not enough resources in the world for everyone. So in order to allow for there to be enough, the poor needed to die out. This is supposed to be shocking. So this use of dysphemistic language is supposed to be shocking and really, really harrowing. and it's also supposed to highlight how truly heartless Scrooge is at this stage of the novella. "But you might know it," observed the gentleman. "It is not my business," Scrooge returned. "It is enough for a man to understand his own business. So at this point in the novel he only cares for himself, and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen." Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labours with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. So he felt proud of himself for defending himself, and he felt like he won, so he felt better about himself instead of feeling worse about the way he just treated the charity workers. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened. So again, the fog and cold weather could represent Scrooge's character. And remember, there's the constant use of the semantic field of cold weather throughout this novel, representing or symbolising Scrooge's own character, and also his determination to hide his inner pearl or soul that was hinted at by the earlier quotation we looked at in the last video, solitary as an oyster. So remember, I said that I am going to help you to join quotations together so that you can speak about them in the exam, and use quotes judiciously, meaning use quotes in a way that looks intelligent, and using short quotes that join together that you can say a lot about. The dark and biting atmosphere, though, is also suitable to a ghost story because obviously there's the supernatural elements within this. So that the people ran about with flaring links, preferring their services to go before horses and carriages and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church. So this is an obvious representation of God looking over Scrooge and having decided he needs to seek redemption, whose gruff old bell was always peeping silly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible. So the invisibility of the bell and the sound it makes adds to the supernatural atmosphere that's building, and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds, with tremulous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head upon there. The cold became intense. In the main street, at the corner of the court, some labourers were repairing the gas pipes and had lighted a great fire in a brazier, round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blazes in rapture. The water plug being left in solitude, its overflowings suddenly congealed, and turned to the misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops where holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Poulterers and grocers' trades became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant, with which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor in the stronghold of the mighty mansion house gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as a Lord Mayor's household should, and even the little tailor, whom he had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and the baby sallied out to buy the beef. So here we see the description of business deals being a lot more agreeable, less profiteering, so people making less money and people being a lot more generous. The Lord Mayor has become generous to his staff. Fines for criminality are being forgiven and forgotten. It reminds us of Fred's statement, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. So this Christmas time is a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. So Dickens continues to present the ideas of Christmas as filling people with good cheer and forgiveness. Foggier yet and colder, piercing, searching, biting cold. If the good St. Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owners of one scant young nose gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold, as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. As that first sound of "God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler, with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his tool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. "You'll want a day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." So Scrooge really doesn't want to give the day off for Christmas Day. The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed, so again we've got him as presented as almost like a pantomime villain here. So not quite hateable for some reason. Pantomime villain, humorous, and not someone who can fully hate. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide on the Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honour of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's buff. So the Cratchit is presented as being really, really excited about going home for Christmas. So we'll finish off here for today. I am now going to show you the revision booklet. So in the last video, we finished off here, I believe. So after solitary as an oyster, we left it there. So the quotations that you need to add to your booklet are "Dismal little cell beyond a sort of tank," "I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry," "If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population." So here I'm just going to shorten it, and you can use ellipses to shorten your quotations like this. And you might want to pause it here so that you can write down the key quotations. Underneath here, like in the last video, I've just added a tiny bit in terms of 803 context. So Scrooge and his Malthusian views are seen in his exchange with the charity workers. Okay, so you might want to pause this as well. Okay, so next, in the next video, we will be going through the next part of stave 1. The staves are quite long, that's why I have sectioned them out. So we'll be looking at the next section of stave 1 in the next video. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.